Hello, my name is Azaria Tate. They said I was a disgrace. My own cousin slapped me in front of the courthouse, called me a filthy animal, cuffed me like a criminal. And my father just stood there, watched, said nothing. I wasn't late. I wasn't violent. I wasn't even out of place. But 5 minutes later, the same cousin who dragged me through the dirt, he stood frozen. When I took the bench as the presiding judge, what makes a family turn on one of their own? What happens when silence is the sharpest betrayal of all? And when the truth walks in, who's left standing? It was 8:43 on a Friday morning when I stepped out of my car, leather heels tapping against the concrete like the ticking hand of a courtroom clock. Dallas heat hadn't quite risen yet, but there was a stillness in the air that hinted at something coming. I had my briefcase in one hand, a navy blouse tucked into tailored gray pants. Civilian clothes, not my robe, not my bench. That day, I hadn't expected to be seen. I wasn't supposed to preside. I was just stopping by the courthouse early to drop off a few amended filings before heading back for a scheduled pre-trial conference at another branch. But the moment my foot touched the first step to the George L. Gale, Allen Sr. Courts building, I felt something change. Not in the wind or in the air, but in me. I saw him before he saw me, Jareth Bellamy, my cousin, a man whose face wore a permanent smirk and whose mouth spat polished poison. He was talking to a clerk, gesturing like he owned the place, which, in his mind, he probably did. His father had held court positions before him. My father still vouched for him in every social circle that mattered. I didn't alter my path. I wasn't in the mood to acknowledge him, and frankly, I was tired of pretending we shared anything other than blood. But then he turned, and his expression shifted. "Hey!" His voice sliced through the morning stillness like a rusty gate slamming shut. "Where do you think you're going?" I barely glanced up. "Good morning, Jareth." "You think you can just walk in here like you belong?" he said, stepping closer. His voice had dropped to a hiss. "Not today." I paused, not in fear, but calculation. "Excuse me?" "Filthy animal," he muttered, low but clear. "You're a disgrace to this family." Before I could react, his hand flew, sharp, fast. The side of my face exploded with pain, and my briefcase dropped from my grip, scattering legal documents across the courthouse steps like shattered glass. I gasped, not out of shock, but because of the sudden weight of reality. He grabbed me by the collar, yanking me close. "You don't get to come in here and pretend you're something you're not," he growled. I could smell his cologne, cheap, too strong, the kind worn by men who need to mask rot. His hand twisted behind my back, cold metal snapping over my wrist. "Jareth," I managed, but before another word could form, he tightened the cuffs and shoved me forward toward the building's front doors. "Get moving," he snapped. "Trespasser." People were staring. No one stepped in. Phones came out. I heard a few murmurs, even a chuckle, but not one voice stood up for me, except I looked up and saw him. Delroy Tate. My father. He stood 20, maybe 30 feet away, wearing his Friday best, pressed khakis, pale blue shirt. He looked straight at me. Our eyes met. He blinked once, turned, and walked away. Just like that. That burned more than the slap, more than the cuffs, more than Jareth's spit-filled insults. Because it wasn't that my father hadn't seen. It was that he had, and didn't care. Inside the courthouse, Jareth paraded me through the security checkpoint like a trophy. My heels scraped the floor with every reluctant step. "This one was trying to sneak into the judge's quarters," he told an officer standing at post. "Suspicious behavior, documents she wasn't supposed to have." A guard raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this?" Jareth's voice became syrupy sweet. "You know how they get when they're caught." I wasn't a person to him anymore. I was a category. As we walked past courtroom 3C, I saw it, my nameplate, still bolted to the door. The Honorable Judge, A. Tate. 20 feet away, so close I could almost touch it. But that morning, I was nothing more than a woman in handcuffs, labeled and dragged like garbage. Jareth leaned in, whispering as we reached the elevator. "You wanted attention?" You got it. He smiled. The kind of smile that expected submission. My jaw ached. My heart did not. I didn't scream, didn't plead, because in my mind I wasn't focused on the handcuffs or the stares or even the shame. I was hearing my mother's voice, steady, clear. Don't let them see you break. I stood taller. The elevator dinged, and the metal doors opened. Jareth gestured for the two uniformed officers to step in with me. As the door slid shut, I caught one final glimpse of the world outside. Sunlight, my scattered papers, my nameplate, the shadow of the man who raised me walking away from it all. My wrists were bound. My jaw was bruised. But my mind was already building the case. They thought this was the end. It wasn't. It was their opening statement, but I was the closing argument. They made their move. Now I make mine. I sat in the holding room for what felt like an hour, but the clock on the wall had barely moved. My wrists were raw from the cuffs, and the side of my face still throbbed from Jareth's slap. But what hurt more, what lingered like the metallic taste of blood at the back of my throat, was that my father had looked me in the eye, and then turned away. That kind of betrayal doesn't shout. It settles into your bones, quietly, like winter. I leaned back in the metal chair, letting the silence soak in. And as the fluorescent lights buzzed above me, my mind wandered, back to Garland 2 months ago. The Civic Hall had been packed, a crowd of local officials, community leaders, families dressed in their Sunday best, even though it was a Thursday evening. Delroy Tate stood at the podium, proud, commanding, with the golden seal of the city projected behind him. And now, he announced, a special recognition for one of our own. A man who's upheld the values of this courthouse with dignity and strength. Jareth Bellamy, please come forward. The applause was deafening. People stood. Cameras flashed. I stayed seated in the back row. No one turned around. No one asked why I wasn't up there. And my name, Azaria Tate, wasn't spoken once. A week earlier, I had finished a grueling federal appeal on a wrongful conviction that saved a young man from a life sentence. But nobody in my family even knew that. Nobody cared to ask. I remember gripping the program in my lap so tightly that the edges bent in half. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just nodded, like someone who'd expected this all along. Because I had. It wasn't new. It had always been Jareth, the golden boy, the son Delroy never had, the one who carried the name right. A month later, they held his engagement party at a lavish banquet hall in Plano. Crystal chandeliers, live jazz quartet, waitstaff in matching black aprons and bow ties. The whole event was dripping in approval I'd never tasted, not even once. When I arrived, late thanks to a last-minute emergency motion filing, I found my name on the table chart. Azaria Tate, table 14, tucked behind a pillar, right next to the kitchen entrance. A restroom sign hung just above my head. And my cousin Sandra passed by and looked confused. Wait, you're not part of the caterers? She asked with a half smile, genuinely unsure. I laughed lightly. No, I'm just here to celebrate. She walked away without apology. I sat there quietly, sipping from a half-empty water glass, watching Jareth walk onto the small stage in the center of the room with his fiancée Lee beside him. To family, he said into the mic, to legacy, and to those who carry our name with pride. The crowd clapped. Delroy wiped away a tear. And I toasted with a glass that had more ice than anything else. I remember thinking, this isn't forgetfulness. This is erasure. Intentional. I could have left. Could have stood up, thrown my glass, made a statement. But what would that do? No, I wasn't here to play their game. I was building a case. One that didn't need evidence from the past, because the present gave me all I needed. After the party, I drove home in silence. The music in the car stayed off. The roads were mostly empty. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but inside I was storming. When I got home, I didn't change, didn't eat. I walked straight to the bookcase in my study and pulled out an old crimson-bound textbook, Torts and Civil Procedure. Inside, wedged between pages that hadn't been turned in years, was a folded note. My mother's handwriting, unmistakable. They'll never applaud you while you're rising. Keep rising. I hadn't read it in years. She'd written it when I was in law school. The night before my first moot court competition, I had called her, nervous, exhausted, convinced I wasn't good enough, and she'd driven 3 hours just to bring me this note and a home-cooked meal. "You don't need their cheers," she'd said. "You need your own fire." The memory of her voice was both balm and blade. I missed her every day, but more than that, I missed having someone in the room who actually saw me. I traced the ink of her words with my finger. My hand didn't shake. I had survived worse than this, and I wasn't done yet. It was close to midnight when I finally moved. I placed the note back inside the book, tucked it deep into my briefcase, and locked it. In the distance, I could still hear the echo of Jareth's voice from earlier that morning. "Filthy animal, family disgrace." He wanted to destroy my image, strip me down to a woman with no worth. But the thing he didn't understand, you can't disgrace someone who's already been through fire. I folded my hands in my lap and exhaled slowly. They might have given him the spotlight, but I carried the truth. And the truth, when ready, burns brighter than any praise ever could. By the time I tucked my mother's note back into the crimson-bound law book and slid it into my briefcase, my mind had shifted from reflection to preparation. I didn't have the luxury of wallowing in pain, not with what I knew, not with what I had. The holding room was cold, not just physically, but emotionally sterile. No one looked me in the eye, not the officers passing by, not the young intern refilling the water jug. I suppose that's how the system survives. Keep your head down, stay uninvolved. But one face caught my attention. A young female clerk, maybe mid-20s, walked past the room and slowed just enough for me to notice. She didn't speak, but her eyes darted to my face, then to the small bruise near my temple, and then to the nameplate beside the door that read, "Temporary Holding, Level 1C. She paused. We locked eyes for a second longer than was comfortable. Then she walked off, fast. I didn't blame her. When the building you work in chews up even its judges, silence becomes a form of self-preservation. The metal cuffs had been removed hours ago after someone realized the optics of dragging a judge through the court in shackles might be inconvenient, but no apology followed. "No, ma'am, or your honor," returned to the tone, just silence. And I knew that silence well. It was the same kind that filled my childhood home after I outperformed Jareth in school. The same silence my father used when he couldn't explain why my achievements didn't make him proud, but Jareth's mediocrity did. 6 years ago, before my mother passed, we'd stood on these very steps. She had held my hand, not like a parent guiding a child, but like a woman anchoring another before the storm. "One day," she said, "this building will carry your name, not theirs." I didn't understand it fully back then. I thought she meant title, career. But now I know. She meant legacy, she meant impact, and she meant truth. I closed my eyes, exhaled, and let the weight of her words settle. Then, as if her voice had triggered something in me, my thoughts jumped 2 weeks back, an evening I'd nearly forgotten about. Or maybe tried to. It was late, almost 11 means. The office floor was quiet, save for the soft whir of the HVAC and the occasional clack of my keyboard. Most of the staff had left hours earlier, but I was still combing through documentation for a wrongful dismissal case tied to internal misconduct, the kind of case that makes enemies on both sides of the aisle. I remember freezing mid-scroll. A name appeared on a digital form, Jareth Bellamy. Nothing unusual at first. He signed a lot of internal memos, but the signature didn't match the one in the database. The penmanship was slightly off, too smooth, too clean. Jareth's real signature always looked rushed, like someone who thought himself too important to finish a line. I pulled the archived version, different dates, same document ID. I called my assistant the next morning. "That document?" she repeated. "It vanished from the case file last month. I thought you pulled it." "I didn't," I said flatly. She paused. "Then someone else did." We both knew what that meant. But in this courthouse, knowing and proving are two very different beasts. That night, instead of heading straight home, I drove to the courthouse annex. My keycard still worked. I made my way to my personal safe, tucked behind a false wall panel in my chambers. Inside, I kept hard copies, originals, the kind of records that don't disappear with a keyboard stroke. There it was, printed the day I first saw the form, the forged signature staring back at me like a ghost of truth. In the corner, in pencil, I had scribbled, "Verify this, could be forged." Back then, it was just instinct, a note to myself. But now, it was everything. I held it for a long time. My fingers ran over the texture of the paper, its fibers rough with possibility. This wasn't just paper, it was insurance, it was memory. It was my mother's voice whispering, "Be ready before they strike." I folded the document with care and slid it into a fresh manila folder. I didn't label it. I didn't trust labels anymore. It went into the bottom of my briefcase, beneath a stack of decoy paperwork, case summaries, form letters, the sort of noise that buries signals. And this morning, when I left my apartment to walk toward the courthouse, before the slap, before the cuffs, before the betrayal, I made sure that folder came with me. They thought they could wipe the slate clean, but I had carved my truth into stone. Now, back in the holding room, I stood and walked toward the small mirrored window in the door. The reflection staring back at me was tired, yes, bruised, but not broken, not even close. "They deleted files," I murmured, voice low and even. "But I kept facts. One of us will lose." They think I'm still playing defense. That's what ran through my mind as I stared at the cracked screen of my work-issued phone, the dull courthouse ceiling light casting a shadow across my lap. What they didn't realize, what they never cared to understand, was that I'd never been someone who waited for the storm to pass. I learned, early on, to move during thunder. 2 days before Jareth cuffed me like a common criminal, I received an anonymous email from an address that looked like a temp's, something like jclerk43@. I almost deleted it, assuming it was junk. But something about the subject line, FYI, you didn't get this from me, made me pause. The message was short, unsigned, no greeting, just a line. "You should see what your father submitted last week to internal oversight." Below it, a single PDF attachment. I clicked, and there it was, an internal memo from Delroy Tate, my father, to the Judicial Oversight Committee. The header was official, city seal, time-stamped. It was legit. The contents? Judge Azaria Tate should be removed from all high-visibility cases immediately. She has become increasingly confrontational, emotionally reactive, and has shown disregard for procedural protocol. Her presence creates tension among staff and risks public perception of the judiciary. I read it twice, then a third time, emotionally reactive, disregard for protocol, a risk. Not once had I received a formal complaint. Not once had I been disciplined, flagged, or warned. And yet, here he was, writing me out of existence from the inside. He didn't call. He didn't meet me face to face. He didn't even have the decency to lie to my face. The draft reply I typed was long. I included facts, dates, case outcomes, letters of commendation. But I never sent it, because this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Instead, I forwarded the email to an encrypted cloud archive I kept for exactly this kind of storm. I whispered to the screen as it uploaded, "Just in case." By the time I stood from my desk, it was close to midnight. The building was dark, hollow in its silence. My heels echoed louder than I liked as I made my way to the elevator. I thought about my mother again. About how she used to say, "People don't lie to you because they're brave. They lie because they believe you'll never fight back." She was right. I hadn't fought back. Not really. Not until now. A week earlier, before the slap, the humiliation, the chain reaction, something else had happened. A brief encounter, easily overlooked, but now sitting front and center in my memory. I'd stopped by the Courthouse cafe to grab a coffee before a status hearing. It was early. The place wasn't crowded. I was reviewing notes when someone approached quietly from the side. It was Lee, Jareth's fiancée. We weren't close. She'd always been polite, but distant. Pretty in the way some women seem trained to be, soft-spoken, smiling on cue. She wore cream sweaters and gold jewelry, and always had a touch of mascara, but never eyeliner. She hesitated, standing by my table. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, eyes darting toward the exit. I nodded. "Of course." She didn't order anything. I won't stay long, she said, adjusting the strap of her purse. I don't want to overstep, but her voice cracked, just a little. But I think you should be careful, she said quietly. My pen paused over my notepad. Careful? She glanced around again. Jareth, he's been watching you. Not just at work. He's talking to people, about you. Things that don't sound right. I waited, letting the silence coax her. She continued, I know he's your cousin. I know you two have history. But he's not the same when you're not around. And he talks like you're a threat. That word settled into my chest like an iron weight. I opened my mouth to ask more, but Lee stood up suddenly. I shouldn't have said anything, she whispered. Just watch your back. And she left. Now, sitting in this sterile room, that moment clicked into place like the final puzzle piece. Lee's discomfort, the email, the reassigned cases, the sudden exclusion from interdepartmental meetings that once included me, the accidental scheduling conflicts that kept me from key pretrial discussions. None of it was coincidence. Jareth wasn't just bruising my face, he was bleeding me out of the system, quietly, strategically. I wasn't reacting. I was recognizing. This was a pattern, and it was personal. The lights above flickered. Outside the room, I heard footsteps, laughter, life moving on like I hadn't just been cuffed and dragged. I opened my phone, pulled up the email again. My eyes skimmed Delroy's words. Each sentence, each phrase, was calculated, sterile, designed to sound concerned while signaling the opposite. She's already made enemies here. Enemies, not colleagues, not peers, enemies. I tapped my finger on the screen once, then again, then stared ahead. He didn't just throw me under the bus. He backed it up, twice. I didn't feel rage, not anymore. It was colder than that. A stillness that came when you've run out of tears and realize what needs to be done doesn't require emotion. It requires precision. They think I'm still playing defense. Let them. They haven't seen what happens when I go on offense. The glow from the email still lingered in my vision as I shut my laptop. The courthouse was mostly dark, and the last of the janitorial crew had left about an hour ago. I stood alone in my office, arms crossed, the city lights outside my window flickering like distant alarms. They planned to erase me quietly, I murmured, repeating the words in my head again, this time with less hurt and more resolve. Fine, I'll exit loudly, if I must. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent the early morning hours digging through archived copies of court assignments and dockets I'd flagged weeks ago. One by one, I lined them up across my office table. I started noticing it. Patterns, internal case shifts that bypassed standard routing, reassigned responsibilities, missing entries, and one name surfacing again and again. Jareth. By 7:45 a.m. I had a plan, not a full offensive strike. Not yet, just enough to test the waters. I sent a private calendar invite to Judge Arnett, an old-school by-the-book man. He wasn't warm, but he wasn't crooked. He'd never gone out of his way to champion me, but he also hadn't looked the other way when others tried to cut me out. Neutral was the most I could hope for, and that was enough. The invite said, 5 minutes, discreet, regarding document integrity. We met that afternoon in his chambers. He greeted me with his usual nod and waved for me to sit. I'll make this quick, I said, laying down a folder. This isn't an accusation. Not yet. It's a concern. Quietly handled, for now. He opened the folder and scanned the redacted page I'd provided. The original version, with initials removed, timestamps blurred, was carefully clipped to a more recent, modified document. Where did this come from? He asked, his brow furrowing. I can't share that yet, I said, but I've confirmed at least 3 inconsistencies tied to docket routing and internal documentation. All within the last month. He leaned back, thumb tapping his bottom lip. What are you asking? Watch closely, I said. That's it. Just keep an eye on what comes across your desk. He nodded slowly. And if you're wrong? I gave him the most honest answer I had. Then I'll be the one apologizing. He didn't say much else, But as I left, I caught the way he lingered on that folder, like he wasn't ready to set it down just yet. Later that week, I was walking the main hallway outside courtroom 2D when I saw Arnett speaking with Jareth. From a distance, it looked cordial, but I could tell from Jareth's posture, shoulders tensed, neck stiff, that something had been said. When he turned and saw me coming, his jaw tightened. I didn't stop. I walked right past them with a file in hand, one he would recognize. On the spine were my initials, A.T., written in black ink. But inside was the forged file copy with his... I didn't need to say anything. That folder was its own message. He watched me go, didn't follow, didn't speak. The next day, someone else started noticing the cracks. Brian McDonough, the senior clerk who once called me too stiff for leadership, had apparently found a docket assignment that didn't match its timestamp. He didn't come to me directly, but I overheard him in the copy room talking to a younger clerk. "This doesn't match," he said, "and I don't like how it got here." The younger clerk asked if it was worth flagging. Brian's answer: "When Judge Tate starts noticing things, it's worth looking into." I didn't smile, but I felt it. The ground was shifting. Slowly, quietly, but shifting. I waited until Friday before making my next move. At exactly 5:15 p.m., I sent a text message to Jareth. Nothing dramatic, just a line. "We need to talk, privately. Courthouse parking level C." I waited in my car for 15 minutes before he arrived. He pulled up in that Navy SUV he liked to show off, parked next to me, and stepped out like he was heading into battle. He walked toward me with that signature confidence, the one that always felt more performative than real. "You got something to say?" he asked. I didn't rise to it. I stayed where I was, leaning against the driver's side door, arms crossed. "You forge one more document," I said evenly, "and next time it won't be family protecting you. It'll be federal law exposing you." He didn't laugh. That surprised me. He stared at me for a moment, calculating, then said, "You think you can scare me with empty threats?" "They're not threats, Jareth," I replied. "They're facts waiting for a signature." He took a step closer. "You always think you're so much better than everyone else, like rules only matter when they come from you." "No," I said. "I think rules matter when people think they're above them." For a beat, he didn't respond. Then he turned, walked back to his car, and slammed the door hard enough to make the frame shake. As he reversed out of the spot, I watched him glance in his rearview mirror. The moment our eyes met, I saw it. Fear. Not the kind that comes from being caught, but the kind that comes from losing control. And control was everything to Jareth. I stayed there a few more minutes before heading home. On the drive, my phone buzzed once. I didn't check it until I parked. A message from an unknown number. "She's making moves," it read. "Time to shut her down." The sound of his boots against the hallway tile hit before I saw him. I didn't move, didn't speak, just watched Jareth pass. His jaw was tight, lips pressed into that familiar sneer he thought passed for professionalism. He didn't look at me directly, but I knew he felt my eyes on him. He always did. When he reached the end of the hall and turned left, I whispered under my breath, just loud enough for the air to carry it forward. "Evidence never blinks, cousin." 2 days earlier, the brunch had unfolded like a slow train wreck. It was supposed to be a family reconciliation lunch, according to my Aunt Sharon, who still thought putting people in a room with roast beef and string beans could fix decades of resentment. The restaurant wasn't extravagant, mid-tier, warm lighting, overused burgundy carpet, but it screamed respectable gathering. We were given a long table in the back near the kitchen doors, the kind of seat where waiters would breeze past with trays and the occasional clatter of dishware broke up every awkward silence. I showed up 10 minutes early, just to control the narrative. They'd placed my name card near the end of the table, next to the restroom sign again. Misspelled, of course. Azara Tate. I didn't fix it, just sat down quietly, took out my phone, and waited. 15 minutes in, Jareth strolled in like the room owed him applause. Navy blazer, crisp shirt, no tie. That swagger that only came from men who'd never been told no, and never learned the consequences of it. Delroy arrived shortly after. He didn't look at me. Not once. He took his seat at the head of the table and made small talk with Aunt Lorraine about her bunion surgery. I sipped my water and listened. The meal was average, the conversation worse. I was mid-bite into an overcooked piece of chicken when Jareth raised his glass. "To those who lead with pride," he said, smiling like a man who'd rehearsed the line in front of his mirror. "Not with grudges." Polite chuckles echoed. Delroy smirked and nodded like a proud father. No one said my name. No one needed to. That toast wasn't meant for everyone. It was aimed like a dart, and it hit. Across the table, Aunt Sharon leaned toward another cousin and whispered, "She used to be so promising. Wonder what happened." She didn't know I heard, but I did. I placed my fork down gently, dabbed the corner of my mouth with the napkin, and reached into my purse. The USB drive was small, barely the size of a house key. Black, no label. I stood slowly, circled around the table, and stopped next to my father. He looked up, surprised I was standing. I placed the drive beside his wine glass. "Play this when you get home," I said calmly. "Then ask me what happened." And I walked out. No dramatic exit, no yelling, just a silent exit with everything they'd never expect from me: control. That night, I didn't go home immediately. I drove. Past downtown, past my exit, drove until the lights thinned and the hum of the road was louder than my thoughts. When I finally made it back, it was nearly 11 p.m. The building was quiet, the parking lot empty except for a few late-shift janitors. Delroy's house wasn't far from mine. I knew, without a doubt, he was awake, and I knew that flash drive had been used. I pictured him in his study, in that stiff leather chair, the glass of bourbon sweating in his hand as he clicked play. The footage was raw. Jareth's body cam, full angle, uncropped. Me approaching the courthouse, papers in hand. His voice, "Filthy animal, family disgrace." The slap, the fall. The way my papers scattered like confetti no one asked for. The sound of the cuffs clicking closed. And the grin, that damned grin on his face. I didn't need Delroy to call me afterward. Didn't expect it. What I did expect came the next morning. Judge Arnett called an emergency meeting with the Internal Affairs Division. Someone had submitted the footage anonymously. I didn't need to ask who. Arnett wasn't warm, but he wasn't blind either. He knew injustice when it slapped him across the bench. The whispers in the courthouse changed tone that week. Where once there had been mutters of difficult, there were now glances of respect. Where there had been avoidance, now there was quiet curiosity. I walked through those halls without ducking my head, because I knew what they knew now, what Jareth feared the most. Truth doesn't stutter. 2 days later, as I passed him in that hallway, his eyes avoided mine. He didn't speak, didn't smirk, didn't throw a line over his shoulder like he usually did. He just kept walking, and I let the silence hang between us for a few steps before offering him my own parting gift. "Evidence never blinks, cousin." He flinched, only slightly, but enough. He didn't even have the courage to meet my eyes. As Jareth disappeared down the corridor, pretending like he hadn't just been unraveled in silence, I turned and walked toward the elevators. I didn't rush. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead accompanied each step like a quiet drum roll. I knew what was waiting for me the next morning. I knew the whispers would start early, before the courtroom even opened. And I knew Jareth wouldn't be the only one who had something to lose. Rumors were already circling that a new judge was flying in from Austin to preside over the misconduct hearing. The more dramatic clerks claimed it was someone from the state ethics board. Others said a federal liaison was coming. They were all wrong. That morning, I left my apartment at 6:45 a.m., sharp. No robe, no escort, just a plain black suit, and the folder I'd kept tucked away like a final move on a chessboard. The courthouse parking lot was half empty when I arrived. I liked it that way. Less eyes, more air. Inside, the building felt different. Not quieter, but expectant, like everyone sensed the tension had hit its boiling point. Security barely made eye contact as I walked through the metal detectors. The bailiff nodded, but didn't speak. Even Judge Arnett's clerk avoided small talk when she passed me the docket schedule. "Are we good?" I asked her, just before she turned. She hesitated. They think someone from the outside is coming in. I smirked, not with joy, but with precision. They're half right, I said. At exactly 9:00 a.m., I stepped through the side chamber entrance into courtroom 3C, the very same courtroom where Jareth once told a room full of staff I was unstable, emotional, and difficult to manage. Funny how quick people are to label you when you stop making yourself small for their comfort. The courtroom was already full. Staff, clerks, a few local attorneys. Even Delroy was there, back row, still as stone. Jareth sat at the prosecution table, back straight, suit crisp, confidence hanging off him like a tailored lie. The bailiff cleared his throat and stood. All rise. The entire room shifted upward like a tide pulled by gravity. The Honorable Judge Azaria Tate presiding. Silence. For a beat too long. Gasps followed. A few murmured, "What the?" And, "You've got to be kidding." I took my place at the bench, laid my file on the podium, and looked up. Jareth's face drained. Delroy leaned slightly forward, eyes locked on me like he was seeing something unfamiliar, or maybe something he'd buried a long time ago. I didn't wait for order to settle. I spoke clearly, calmly. This court is now in session. We are gathered to review concerns regarding the integrity of internal court operations, with specific attention to documentation inconsistencies, unauthorized case reassignment, and potential tampering of official files. A woman from the back whispered, "That's the file she flagged." I opened the folder slowly, revealing the hard copy, my hard copy, with the pencil scribbled note at the bottom. "Verify this. Could be forged." I slid it across to the court clerk without a word, then pulled out a printed log of access timestamps from our court database. This document, I began, holding it up, was altered, originally submitted on March 17th, accessed by user J. Bellamy on April 4th, modified April 4th, resubmitted without authorization. I clicked the projector remote. On the screen, the security log appeared in clear font. No speculation. Just data. Next, I pulled up the body cam footage, the same footage Delroy had watched in private. But this time, it played in full view, without edits. We watched Jareth shove me, call me names, cuff me, smile. No one in the courtroom moved. Even the air felt heavier. Then came the final piece. I held up a portable speaker and pressed play. A recording captured from the hallway the week before. Jareth's voice, unmistakable. "She's a problem. You let her stay long enough, she'll ruin everything we've built. I don't care what it takes. She has to go." I let it echo. Let the silence after it sting. Jareth jumped from his seat. "This is family. You can't—" I held up my hand. "And family should have protected me before putting me in handcuffs." His mouth opened again, but no words came. From the corner of the courtroom, Judge Arnett stood. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't shocked, just decisive. "Mr. Bellamy," he said, "you are hereby suspended pending federal review of all internal court activity you have been involved in over the past 12 months. A collective inhale filled the room. Jareth looked at me, rage and disbelief swirling behind his eyes. I leaned forward just enough to meet his gaze without flinching. "This court doesn't deal in grudges," I said. "It deals in proof." Outside, reporters had already gathered. Word spreads fast in government buildings. I exited through the side, but one young journalist caught me in the corridor near the stairs. "I've been covering courtrooms for 8 years," he said. "That was the most powerful takedown I've seen from the bench." I adjusted my blazer, looked him square in the eye. "That wasn't a takedown," I said. "That was self-defense." The echo of my own words followed me long after I stepped out of that hallway. That wasn't a takedown. That was self-defense. And yet, there was a strange stillness in my chest. A quiet, not from triumph, but from clarity. I didn't go straight home that evening. Instead, I returned to my chambers, alone. My robe still hung on the hook by the door, untouched since that morning. I stared at it for a moment, the fabric soft but heavy with the weight of what it symbolized. I didn't put it on. Instead, I sat at my desk and began drafting a formal recusal statement. To the Judicial Conduct Committee, I, Judge Azaria Tate, Respectfully submit my intent to recuse myself from the criminal case of Mr. Jareth Bellamy due to personal proximity and professional conflict of interest. This decision is made in the interest of maintaining impartiality and integrity in these proceedings. I trust the bench will assign a qualified external judge for fair and lawful adjudication. A.T. I read it twice before hitting print. The sound of the machine was loud in the stillness, not a sound from the halls outside, not a knock, not even a phone buzz, just me and my decision, and it felt exactly right. The next morning, the media caught wind of it faster than I expected. Judge Tate steps down from Bellamy case ran in the Dallas Chronicle, followed by op-eds lauding my ethics, my restraint. Some called it graceful. Others said it was the ultimate chess move. They could keep the headlines. I wasn't after praise. I was after clean lines, truth, no conflict of interest, no revenge narrative, just the facts, laid bare, handled by a bench that couldn't be accused of bias. The state appointed Judge Howard Reese from Austin to take over. Older man, hardliner, Republican-leaning, but known for fair black and white rulings. He didn't care for courtroom theatrics, which made him perfect for this. I didn't attend the full trial. I didn't need to. I'd already seen the evidence, submitted it myself. Still, I watched the first day's proceedings from a private conference room upstairs. Just long enough to hear the list of exhibits introduced into record, the forged documents, the access logs, the hallway audio, the full-length body cam footage, Lee's sworn affidavit. That last one hit harder than I'd expected. Lee. She didn't just step forward. She testified. According to court transcripts, she'd overheard Jareth bragging to a friend about cleaning house, referencing documents no one will ever see again. She admitted she hadn't understood the full context until the footage came out, but she spoke anyway. The trial lasted 4 days. By day 5, the courtroom was standing room only. Attorneys, interns, even retired judges showed up. They wanted to see how the story ended. Judge Reese's verdict was sharp and swift. Mr. Jareth Bellamy is found guilty on 2 counts: tampering with official government records, assault of a judicial officer in the execution of their duties. There was no murmuring, just stillness. Sentencing: 8 years in a state facility, no possibility of parole. I wasn't in the room when the cuffs clicked closed around Jareth's wrists this time, but I saw the photos later. No smirk, no swagger, just a man stripped of the illusion he built. The courthouse buzzed with commentary for days. Some said it was poetic justice. Others said it was about damn time someone took down the Bellamys. But I wasn't interested in gossip. I was watching for something else. My father, Delroy, had shown up to sentencing, sat in the same back row where he'd once watched me get paraded through in handcuffs. He didn't try to intervene. He didn't speak on Jareth's behalf. But after the session ended, as the courtroom emptied, he approached me just outside the lobby near the vending machines. "Azaria," he said, quiet, hesitant. I didn't turn. "I didn't know it would go this far," he offered. I looked at him, dead in the eye. "You knew," I said flatly. "You just didn't stop it." There was no yelling, no closure, just that, what needed to be said. He didn't argue. He nodded, slowly, then turned and walked away. Maybe for the first time he realized there was no erasing what had happened, not with silence, not with authority, not even with shared blood. That evening, the local news ran a piece called "Justice from Within: The Bellamy Scandal." They highlighted the court's cleanup efforts, new policies being drafted to prevent future internal abuse. I watched the segment with the sound off. I didn't need them to tell me what justice looked like. I'd lived it. Around 10:30 that night, I stood out on my apartment balcony, city lights flickering like old stars. It was calm, too calm, almost. In my lap rested a white envelope, my name written in my father's handwriting, block letters, carefully penned. He'd left it at the front desk of my building. I hadn't opened it yet. I turned it over once, then again. But I didn't open it. I lit a candle instead. Some things deserve silence. Not because they don't matter, but because they no longer control you. Some silence is more powerful than answers. The candle's flame flickered in the corner of my office, casting just enough warmth to blur the edges of everything. It had become a quiet ritual. Light it when the noise settled, let the silence expand. And today, the silence wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed. Not the kind that leaves you shattered, but the kind that clarifies, that cuts, that forces you to sit still and realize that peace isn't always gentle. Sometimes it comes with sharp edges and no apologies. I sat in my chambers, back in my usual chair, an unopened envelope resting in my lap. It had been 6 months since the sentencing. 6 months since Jareth was led out of my courtroom in cuffs, flanked by officers who didn't need to be told twice. 6 months since the halls of the courthouse shifted beneath my feet, not in chaos, but in recognition. The building had since returned to its rhythm. Motions filed, hearings continued, justice delayed, justice demanded. But for me, something had settled, something that didn't need to be voiced to be understood. I kept my door closed more often now, not to shut people out, but to hold myself in. Silence, I'd learned, has a weight to it, one that demands space, not explanation. That morning, I was reviewing a summary judgment motion when Raina, my assistant, tapped lightly and peeked her head in. "You got another call from Southwestern Law," she said. "They want to confirm your availability for next semester's lecture." I didn't have to check my planner. I already knew what it would say. "Tell them yes," I said. She nodded, paused at the door, then added, "The topic they proposed, integrity under fire." I gave a short smile. Fitting. After she left, I reached for my briefcase, the same one Jareth had slapped from my hands in that hallway months ago. The scuff on the bottom corner was still there. I could have replaced it. I hadn't, not because I couldn't, but because it reminded me of something essential, what it means to keep standing, even after someone tries to knock you down for daring to take up space. Inside the case, wedged between legal pads and annotated rulings, was the envelope from my father. Still sealed. He'd left it for me at the front desk of my building. No note, no context. Just a manila envelope with my name written in his familiar, angular print. I hadn't opened it. Not until today. I peeled it open slowly, deliberately. The letter inside was handwritten, each line neatly measured. No typos. No scratched-out words. Delroy always took his time with things that mattered. "Azaria, I failed you, not once, not twice, but in all the small, invisible ways that matter most. I thought protecting the family name meant keeping the peace." I didn't realize that peace built on silence is just denial dressed up in good manners. You didn't deserve what happened. And I should have stopped it. I should have stopped him. I was afraid to face what I already knew. That's not an excuse, but it is the truth. You've always carried the weight we refuse to lift. I see that now, and I hope in time you'll see me as something more than a man who stayed quiet too long. You are not a burden. You're the foundation. Love, Dad. I folded the letter carefully. There were no tears, no breaking open, just breath and stillness. I tucked the letter inside the crimson law book my mother had given me, the one she gave me the night I passed the bar, wrapped in paper. A handwritten note tucked between the pages. The book was already filled with lessons. This letter was just another one, hard won, late learned, but real. That weekend, I went back to the courthouse steps. Not for work, not for duty, just for memory. The sun was low, amber light stretching long shadows across the stone. I sat on the second step from the top, the same step where my mother once told me, "One day, they won't just fear you. They'll respect you." She was right. But what she hadn't said, what I had learned for myself, was this. Respect doesn't always cheer. It doesn't come in applause or headlines. Sometimes it arrives quietly, a door that opens instead of closing, a voice in a meeting that doesn't interrupt, a space that isn't questioned. Sometimes, respect is what remains after power leaves the room. Sometimes, it's a man in cuffs being escorted out while you, still, silent, steady, stay seated. I remained there until the light dimmed. And when I stood, I felt it, that clean edge of peace, sharp and precise. The next week, I walked into the lecture hall at Southwestern Law. Students turned as I entered, rows of them, eyes curious, notebooks open, laptops glowing. Some were young and eager, others older, more weathered, returning to finish what they'd once put down. I didn't speak about Jareth. Not by name. I didn't describe the hallway footage. I didn't show the transcripts or the photographs that never made it to court. I didn't talk about the bruises that didn't leave marks, but never quite healed. Instead, I talked about integrity, about what it costs, and why it's worth it. Justice, I told them, doesn't always feel like winning. Sometimes it feels like surviving. Sometimes it feels like sitting still when every part of you wants to scream. They were quiet. I liked that. Afterward, one student stayed behind, a woman in her 50s. She introduced herself softly, said she'd gone back to law school after raising 3 kids. "I watched your hearing," she said, "the way you held your ground. I just wanted to thank you." I nodded, unsure what to say. Sometimes, gratitude feels heavier than the pain it follows. That night, back home, I placed my gavel on the shelf beside the fountain pen my mother gave me at graduation. She'd saved for it, engraved my initials in the brass cap herself. I opened my journal and wrote one line: "Justice delivered doesn't always heal, but it always remembers." I closed the book, slid it into the drawer. Then I whispered something into the room. Not for the world, not for headlines, just for me. He called me a disgrace, but I carried the name, and I made it mean something. Sometimes the deepest scars aren't left by strangers, but by the silence of those who were supposed to protect us. Azaria's story isn't just about courtroom justice, it's about reclaiming your voice, even when the people closest to you try to silence it. Have you ever been let down by someone in your family when it mattered most? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful family stories just like this one.